Hong Kong Island, is occupied by the British during the First Opium War, on the 20th of January 1841. During the 17th and 18th centuries, European empires gradually expanded across the world, as European states developed economies built on maritime trade, colonial extraction, and advances in technology. The imperial Qing dynasty of China was at the time confronted with newly developing concepts of the international system and state-to-state relations. European trading posts expanded into territorial control in nearby India and on the islands that are now Indonesia. The Qing response, successful for a time, was to establish the Canton system in 1756, which restricted maritime trade to the city of Canton, modern-day Guangzhou, and gave monopoly trading rights to private Chinese merchants. The Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company had long before been granted similar monopoly rights by their governments. China was the main supplier of its native tea to the British, whose annual domestic consumption reached 13,600,000 kilograms in 1830, an average of 0.47 kilograms per head of population. From the British economic standpoint, Chinese tea was a crucial item, since it provided massive wealth for foreign businessmen in China, called taipans, while the duty, or taxation on tea, accounted for 10% of the government's income. Some of the earliest items sold to China, in exchange for tea, were British clocks, watches and musical boxes known as sing-songs. But since China had little demand for European goods, the Chinese insisted to be paid in silver for goods such as silk, tea, and ceramics. Such imbalance worried the mercantilist government of Britain. The one thing, though, that was indeed in high demand in China is opium. Opium first arrived in China in the 7th century as part of the merchandise of Arab traders. At first it was used for medical purposes only, but the drug later also functioned as an aphrodisiac. And that provided the remedy to the British trade imbalances, even though an anti-opium edict, prohibiting the trade of opium, was promulgated first in 1729, and in starker terms reissued in 1799. The British East India Company, however, greatly expanded its production of opium in Bengal, and so its profits. The Daoguang Emperor, concerned both over the outflow of silver and the damage that opium smoking was causing to his subjects, ordered Lin Zexu, a Chinese political philosopher and politician, to end the opium trade. One of the first things Lin did was to write an open letter to Queen Victoria in 1839, urging England to end the opium trade. He argued that China was providing Britain with valuable commodities, such as tea, porcelain, spices and silk, with Britain sending only poison in return. He accused the foreigner traders of coveting profit and lacking morality. His memorial expressed a desire that the ruler would act in accordance with decent feeling and support his efforts. Since he believed that opium was banned in the United Kingdom, he thought it was wrong for Queen Victoria to support it in China. The letter elicited no response, but it was later reprinted in the London Times as a direct appeal to the British public. An edict from the Daoguang Emperor followed on the 18th of March 1839, emphasizing the serious penalties for opium smuggling that would now apply. Lin started to take measures that would eliminate the opium trade. He was a formidable bureaucrat, known for his competence and high moral standards, with an imperial commission from the Daoguang Emperor to halt the illegal importation of opium by the British. He arrested more than 1,700 Chinese opium dealers and confiscated over 70,000 opium pipes. He initially attempted to get foreign companies to forfeit their opium stores in exchange for tea, but this ultimately failed. Lin resorted to using force in the Western Merchants' Enclave. A month and a half later, the merchants gave up nearly 1.2 million kilograms of opium. Beginning on the 3rd of June 1839, 500 workers labored for 23 days to destroy it, mixing the opium with lime and salt, and throwing it into the sea outside of Human Town. Despite the opium ban, the British government supported the merchants' demand for compensation for seized goods, and insisted on the principles of free trade and equal diplomatic recognition with China. Opium was Britain's single most profitable commodity trade of the 19th century. After months of tensions between the two nations, the British Navy launched an expedition in June 1840. The first part of the expeditionary force arrived in China aboard 15 barracks ships, 4 steam-powered gunboats, and 25 smaller boats. The First Opium War revealed the outdated state of the Chinese military. The Qing Navy, composed entirely of wooden sailing junks, was severely outclassed by the modern tactics and firepower of the British Royal Navy. British soldiers, using advanced muskets and artillery, easily outmaneuvered and outgunned Qing forces in ground battles. After a series of Chinese defeats, Hong Kong Island was occupied by the British on the 20th of January 1841. Sir Edward Belcher, a British naval officer aboard HMS Sulphur, landed in Hong Kong on the 25th of January 1841. Possession Street still exists to mark the event. Commodore Sir Gordon Bremer, a Royal Navy officer, who also served in the Napoleonic Wars, raised the Union Jack and claimed Hong Kong as a colony on the 26th of January 1841. The Chinese were ultimately defeated in August 1842 by a force using ships and weapons that was technologically far superior to their own. The British then imposed the Treaty of Nanking, which forced China to increase foreign trade, give compensation, and cede Hong Kong to the British. The treaty was signed on board the HMS Cornwallis on the 29th of August 1842. Subsequently, Hong Kong Island was ceded to Britain in 1842 under the Treaty of Nanking, when the territory became a crown colony.